All right, are you ready?
I believe I am. Check level. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, mine's looking good. Here we are. This is Geek Channel 8 podcast, number 1. So the idea was just to have friends of mine come on here and talk about pop culture, specifically the history of pop culture, because I like history and I like pop culture. And I thought that it would be interesting to do the history of pop culture because that's not something I've seen or heard, actually, a podcast of before, or very few. And so today, with me is my semi-regular co-host, Nat.
How's it going, guys?
So, Nat, we've known each other for, I don't know.
Let's just call it 10 years, Eric. Let's make it sound.
Okay, 10 years. We've known each other for at least 10 whole years. And in that time, we've had many a discussion about pop culture stuff.
You actually are the one that introduced me to Apocalypse Now, a movie I had not seen. Yeah, to this day, one of my favorites. But
I love that movie. It's about traveling into the jungle and the primal nature of the jungle, which is something we will be talking about today, a little bit later.
Do I have just one moment to point out? Last night, I realized the vast and many similarities between Apocalypse Now and The Lord of the Rings. We don't have to dwell on this for too long, but really, you could smush those together into an amazing video collage. And
interesting.
Right?
Maybe we'll talk about that on a future podcast.
I'm totally okay revisiting this. It's a brand new idea. I have not chewed it yet, but it's in there.
Let's put a pin in that. What have you been? What films, videos, comics, books, TV shows that have you been watching lately?
This came as a link to me 2 days ago. I've just found out about it. There's a gentleman on YouTube. His channel is Nigel's, Nigel''S. He has taken the Star Wars radio dramas from NPR back in the 80s.
Oh yeah.
Chopped out all of the intros and outros. So basically you can listen to the entire Star Wars radio drama in 5 hours.
Wow.
It's weird because they have this very 1940s pacing and exposition and everything to them.
I remember those radio dramas when I was a kid, and I actually cassette taped them off of the radio and chopped out the intros and so that I could listen to them too.
Dude, I could recite to you the litany of differences between the radio show and the movies. Don't get me wrong, I was pretty cool at 13, but I wasn't not going to compulsively listen to Star Wars and keep a notebook of all the differences cool. I was totally that guy. But yeah. They're, again, search them up. Nigel's Remix. I think it's Nigel's Remix. It's so much fun listening to these again.
You had mentioned that they have 1940s sort of pacing in 1940s. So that was the heyday of radio dramas, and we'll probably talk about those on a future podcast too. But if you think about it, the 1940s were so much closer in time to when Star Wars existed and when those radio dramas were made than Star Wars is, the original New Hope is, to now, right? Think about it.
No, you're old. No. Don't make this about me, dude. That's terrible.
if you think about it, it really is, because the 40s was just, 30 years earlier then, and the first Star Wars film came out in 77. So we're recording this in 2020. You're the math problem. You're the word problem guy.
No, this is I am not comfortable with any conclusions I can draw from this, I guess is where I'm going. Let's move on.
Okay. Moving on. What I want to talk about on the show a lot is looking at very iconic characters and how they've changed and been reinvented over time. And one of the earliest characters to make an appearance on the film screen and come back year after year, decade after decade, is Tarzan. The first Tarzan film was Tarzan of the Apes in 1918, starring Elmo Lincoln as Tarzan, or as the adult version of Tarzan. I believe Gordon Griffith was the name of the boy version of Tarzan. And so I thought we should go back and rewatch that. And before we start talking about that, I'll say that I started watching it, and then I realized that I had never read the book, and it was really hard to parse it out in some ways without knowing the history. I wanted to know how closely it followed the book and stuff like that. So I actually dug up this copy, started reading it. I'm not very far in it. I'm only in the first several pages somewhere.
I am curious with what you have read so far. I would like to contrast that to the filmmaking, because like a lot of it, if you don't mind, if I jump in.
Yeah,
like,
jump in.
I'll start. Like, what I realized in the first 2 minutes of the film, when they're, I want to know, when was B-roll invented? Because I don't know that B-roll had technically been invented when they filmed this in 1918, but they put together what I would refer to as like a solid minute and a half of B-roll exposition shots, to the point where I was bored of looking at like obviously zoo filmed creatures trying to, Africa. They're trying to establish that this is taking place in Africa. They're trying to establish like the character and the location and stuff, but it just kept going. And like, they hadn't discovered how long exposition needs to take in video. They hadn't like...
Well, I think it's that, and I think it's something else. Remember, this film was made in 1918. So just seeing, if you watch some of the late 1800 films, which isn't that long before, 20 years before, they were just, we're going to film this animal. We're going to film this train coming into station, Is
this the part where you tell me that this Tarzan movie has more in common with like the Archduke Ferdinand than...
I think it might. I think that just seeing those animals on film, remember, a lot of people wouldn't have seen those. Gorillas, very interesting part of this whole story, gorillas were still being discovered, right? Not all types of gorilla species had been discovered by 1918, right?
Yeah.
So it was a very new thing. So a lot of times Tarzan, and this is why I don't think Tarzan has fared so well in recent decades, is because at that time, the world was still seen as big and unknown. And we live in a world that's seen as small and interconnected, Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons. But we'll talk a little bit about the enduring power of Tarzan. I remember when I first had mentioned that we were going to do this podcast, I didn't want it to be about whatever the latest hot thing was. And
Tarzan on Ice, Disney, I am sure.
Well, I mentioned Tiger King, which is the currently most popular show on Netflix. And I was like, I don't want to talk about Tiger King. And then I realized, as we started doing this, I can't not talk about Tiger King, because Tiger King is actually like the Tarzan tropes are throughout Tiger King. It has. I'm
not agreeing, mind you. I'm just really eager to hear this comment. I want to know how. Please pull these two together, because that would be amazing.
Okay, we'll do that at the end. Let's first talk about a little bit about. Keep jumping in. Okay, so we've only talked about the very beginning, which B-roll wasn't really a thing yet, so it takes a while to get going.
Yeah, they there was this weird pause. But okay. So after that, they jump back to England. They're talking. And it takes me a minute to realize when 1918 actually was. Like, feminism was a very different thing. A few minutes into the film, there was the Greystokes, Lord and Lady Greystoke, whose name I've forgotten and are not important to this, but and they're being sent on a mission. Or excuse me, Lord Greystoke is being sent on a mission, and Lady Greystoke gives this, what is bravery only for men, like insisting that she go with her husband, and here, like, you can tell when men are writing this, right? Even like early feminism, she says, is bravery only for men? And then she turns to her husband and insists she go as well. Tell him I'll be going with you. Like, it was this weird half feminist thing that I found, I don't want to say charming, but it was like clearly a dude wrote it. Clearly he was trying to empathize with the feminism of 1918, and he missed the mark, but I appreciate his effort.
Yeah, I think it was really progressive in that way. It's got some problems with race, which we might get into, but
I've got the rest of my, the notes are about that.
But as far as gender goes, it was pretty progressive for the time. I think even in the book, she doesn't insist in the book that she go with him, because that's the whole reason, we get Tarzan. She's already pregnant at the time. Right. But they're called the Claytons in the book, and they are, Greystoke is their title. Lord and Lady Greystoke, and he was doing it to advance his position in the government. He wanted to be reassigned, and they sent him to Africa.
Taking a shittier job to get ahead in your career, like, hey, point of note, that's still the same in the 21st century. It'll probably always be the yeah, sure, I'll go 6,000 miles from my home, family, dogs, and stuff if it'll make me a more valuable employee. Can't wait.
I will say in the book, there's a significantly longer bit on the ship to get there. And it reminds me a little of Dracula, the novel Dracula. There is a lot of mood building that happens in both those novels about being on the ship, traveling to the unknown. There's a threat of mutiny on both of them as a constant undercurrent. And it's just interesting that we don't really think about that stuff anymore, because nobody travels by ship anymore. Everybody, after this pandemic, they certainly won't be traveling by ship anymore.
I just want to think, like, because mutinies happen because you are at sail with somebody for months and months and months. And if they are cruel, then obviously, mutiny is a I don't want to call it a valid tool, but look, if it's the only tool you've got to address complaints, it's what you do. I get it. But think about this for one moment. How terrible of an airline pilot would you have to be to ferment mutiny within, like, what, a 2-hour international flight? like you would have to be super bad.
I bet it's happened.
Also, mutinies today, way quicker. Like, what do you kind of land, and there must be that awkward moment after landing where you're just kind of like, so everything's cool then, okay? And you move on. But,
I have no idea.
The next thing I've got, and you were right, like, that part, I have no idea how long it took in the book, but it was 2 minutes on screen. And it was really a bunch of actors shooting back and forth across what I believe is a model tied-up ship in a lot, and then one guy conking somebody else on the head. The important part is that we establish Ben, one of the sailors, saves the family from the mutineers.
Right.
And they get thrown, instead of being killed, they are placed overboard just at some random spot. And that's when the troubling, so right off the bat, they do the establishing shot of the apes. And it's clearly a bunch of 1918 actors in ape costumes. And I get special effects wasn't the thing it was now, but And given their success using live animals later in the film, going with the actors and the terrible costumes was probably the better choice. Like, I get it. Like, I get why they did what they did.
And keep in mind that we know what apes look like from photos, you know?
True.
You know, a gorilla might not have been seen by many of the audience members, you know?
Yeah.
So you tell me that's what a gorilla looks like. Oh, I guess that's what a gorilla looks like, you know?
Yeah. But that's kind of where the, how do I put the, that's where the film starts to be racist. This is the exact point. It goes down the tubes quick from this point. Because the very next thing they introduce is Arab slave traders.
Okay. I wanted to talk about the Arab slave traders for a second here. Because I'm not going to say that the book is not racist. Okay. It's certainly as racist as the times were in general. But I will argue that the book might be a little less racist than the film. Because,
and I was wondering that. I was really curious about that.
As far as I've gotten anyway, Arab slavers aren't mentioned. Like, there are slavers, or there's but what they suggest, what the book seems to suggest, is that they're other European colonial powers.
You gave the little finger quotes, and I was expecting you to use some modern, like, employment engineers. Like, they're friendly.
Let me see if I can find the exact passage, but they suggest that it's like another European power. It's European colonialism. The book both acknowledges European colonialism and condemns it at the same time, which is one of the very interesting things about Tarzan, right?
Yeah.
And we'll talk more. Unfortunately, this movie, Tarzan of the Apes, the 1918 film we're talking about, doesn't cover the whole book. It's only the first half. And in the second half, I think it deals a little bit more with Tarzan's conflict with white people.
If this was made by the people that had never seen apes and they were just like, yeah, make it kind of apish, the same is true of Arabs. Like, they had never seen an Arab. They were just like, make them wear a head veil. Like, yeah, it's fine. They wear sheets. Go. The very next thing I wrote down, and I took this out of one of the placards, out of one of the little what do you call it, Eric? You're the film guy.
A title card,
like the title cards.
Yeah.
I highlighted and wrote down the phrase "little English brain," and I don't remember the context now, but it was on one of the cards. Part of something else. He was still a child at this point. I know that. I just thought it was funny.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of this idea of genetic superiority. Like, you know, it's the fact that he's got an English brain that's going to make him rise above.
Crap tons of that. And in fact, the next thing I have written down is I stopped and wrote down the entire damn card. And it was clothes. At the bottom of his English heart survived a longing for them. Like you're this feral kid, right? And you're trapped in the jungle, and you've never even met your parents in any kind of way that you would remember. But for some reason, the thing you want is clothing. Is pants. Pants. That's the thing that you long for among all other. Not food, not shelter. Pants.
And I think that was an invention of the film, too, because they couldn't have him be naked. Because...
Actually, they do film him naked. I mean, it's from behind. It's like... But I was actually surprised how comfortable they were filming nude people for the film, given how uncomfortable they were even suggesting nudity like 20 or 30 years later.
Revisiting what we were talking about earlier, I didn't find any of the references to the slavers specifically. I'll be further along in the book the next time we talk. But what I did find is his reason for going. And it's a little lengthy quote, but I think it's worth hearing. What it said was, "From the records of the Colonial Office and from the dead man's diary, we learn that a certain young English nobleman, whom we shall call John Clayton, Lord Greystoke, was commissioned to make a peculiarly delicate investigation of conditions in a British West Coast African colony, from whose simple native inhabitants, another European power, was known to be recruiting soldiers for its native army, which it used solely for the forcible collection of rubber and ivory from the savage tribes along the Congo and the Aruwimi. The natives of the British colony complained that many of their young men were enticed away through the medium of fair and glowing promises, but that few, if any, ever returned to their families. The Englishmen in Africa went even further, saying that these poor blacks were held in virtual slavery, since after their terms of enlistment expired, their ignorance was imposed upon by their white officers, and they were told that they had yet several years to serve.
So the makers of the film, I mean, that's clearly anti-Belgian sentiment. Like, let's just cut to the chase. They hate the Belgians. But that's hard to portray on film.
Yeah, they have to simplify it.
They have to simplify it. So they kind of reach into their bag of tricks like, what can we make more visually apparent? They're Arabs. And they just make it this entirely different thing.
Yeah, I think that's true. But also, there was just racism was endemic in the culture. So Elmo Lincoln, who played Tarzan, was also in D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation.
Wow.
And,
okay.
Which is, was originally called The Klansman. It was like this horrible, horrible film about how great the KKK is,
And we're getting to the rest of the film. But one of the things I looked up, like this film was shot 3 years before the Tulsa Massacre. You're absolutely correct. This film was made closer to the Civil War than it was to now. Like that historical benchmarking puts it, it is more antebellum than it is modern. But the attitudes they show in it, it's weird to think of it as foreshadowing. It is weird to think of this movie as kind of unrelated foreshadowing to the largest modern massacre of Black Americans, right? But my God, the attitude, every single thing they do, and I hope the book is different, is talking about the native the natural superiority of Tarzan. He is better than everyone. And most of it's because he's British and he wears pants and he teaches himself to read, right? Most of it is no, Tarzan's... But, it's weird how much time they spend establishing him as this pinnacle.
That's kind of the whole point of the novel, right? He becomes Lord of the Jungle, He becomes the king of this savage, untamed territory.
And watching the film, I guess the thing I am getting from the film is that, well, clearly he would become Lord. Clearly, had any white infant been dumped in the jungle, clearly they would have worn pants and taught themselves to read and then become Lord of the Jungle. Obviously.
Yeah, I think it does a disservice to the character in that way. I do think that, so I never took Tarzan seriously growing up. You and I both grew up in an era that was at the bottom of Tarzan's popularity. So Tarzan starts out there are lots of films between the 19-teens when the book was written. The book was only written a couple of years before the movie came out, and the end of the 60s. And then from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, those 30 years, that 30-year span, suddenly there are very, very few Tarzan films made.
Point of note, you're forgetting the Tarzan cartoon series that we all saw.
If you're talking about the Disney one.
I don't think it was the Disney series. I think it was Funimation or Hanna-Barbera or I'm pretty sure Hanna-Barbera did it.
Okay. I'm forgetting that. But other than that, at least on the big screen, we don't see him again in any major way until the Disney Tarzan film. And that was in 1999. So the very end of the 90s, Now Now he pops back up every so often. Skarsgård was just in one a few years ago.
When I grew up, I remember all of the Dances with Wolves, all of the Last Samurai films, right? I remember, and somebody really succinctly called those, that entire genre of movie, sorry about colonialism.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah.
they just, and this is clearly a we're not sorry yet about, we don't even think to be sorry about colonialism yet film. Like, thank God the British are here.
Yeah, that over time the Tarzan films got dumbed down. They'll get better than this, but they get worse again. But what I wanted to say is that the trope still lives with us in other ways, and this is, you know, one of the ways that struck me when we were originally talking about this was Tiger King. I mean, that hits a lot of the Tarzan tropes, like man's dominion over the beasts is a big one.
Yep.
While not racist per se, everybody in Tiger King is white. Let's just put it that way. Race plays some role in that. I'm not sure exactly what.
But you know what? When you're watching Tiger King, and let me be forthright, I've watched one episode and I couldn't go further. But at no point did I get the feeling that his rise to success was predestined by genetics. Like, I was never, clearly he would own a park in Oklahoma with tiger. Like, no, didn't get any of that. Like, in that way, it was considerably less racist than the Tarzan films.
He might disagree. I don't know.
It's fine. They may have cut that part of the interviews out. Like, I don't know.
But homoeroticism is another running trope through the sort of canon of Tarzan, and we'll get into it more when we get later on in the movies. But I think there's a definite, like, you know, thread of homoeroticism running throughout the Tarzan mythos. The whole idea of a Tiger King, a lord of jungle cats, is not too far off from a Lord of the Apes. You know, it's he lives in this jungle, like, in, you know, created environment, but, you know. Oh, the last thing I wanted to mention was the jungle itself.
Yeah.
They showed a lot of, like, you know, stock footage of Africa at the beginning, but when I was watching it, I was like, this doesn't look like the African jungle at all. This looks like a swamp. Did they shoot this in Florida or something? Sure enough, I looked it up and they shot it in a Louisiana swamp.
Nice.
So, you know, but I guess they did what they had to do for the time.
I'm more than willing to add on to this to watch the other half of the book, as it were. But yeah, it seems the stuff I got just solely from the visual was a lot of weird vestigial stuff about America and filmmaking, and I'm glad we do better now.
Yeah,
I'm really glad films are, even bad films, are way better than that.
Okay, well, we will watch The Romance of Tarzan for next week, and that came out later in 1918, same year, and they did something that filmmaking has only more recently discovered now with Harry Potter and stuff like that. When you have a really big book, it makes sense to break it into more than one movie, you know, rather than have each book be a movie, you know. So I wanted to say that we have an email address. It's GC8 for Geek Channel 8. GC8 podcast, all one word, GC8podcast@gmail.com. So if you have anything you want to tell us, any opinions about the show, you could just send us an email, and hopefully in future episodes we'll be reading some of these emails on the air.
Thank you guys, everybody, for listening. And Eric, this was a great idea. Thank you for having me watch a really racist Tarzan.
Well, you're gonna get to watch a second really racist Tarzan next week. All right. So this is Eric.
This is Nat.
signing off.